The cop ordered a black man to open his trunk during a routine stop. But when she saw what was inside, the summer heat shimmered off the asphalt of Oakwood Avenue. Quiet suburban street lined with well-manicured lawns and modest two-story homes. It was a Friday evening, and the weekend buzz was just beginning to stir in the air. For Marcus Johnson, it should have been the start of a relaxing couple of days off from his demanding job as a software engineer. Instead, it was about to become one of the most tense and potentially life-changing moments of his life. Marcus, a 35-year-old black man with a trim beard and kind eyes, sat behind the wheel of his sleek, charcoal-gray Audi. His hands gripped the steering wheel a little tighter than usual, his dark eyes flicking nervously to the rearview mirror every few seconds. Flashing blue and red lights of the police cruiser behind him seemed to pulse in sync with his rapidly beating heart. He had been driving home from work, his mind on the weekend plans he and his wife Lisa had made. A nice dinner out, maybe catch that new art exhibition downtown. Now those plans felt like a distant dream as he pulled over to the curb, following the unspoken command of those flashing lights. Marcus took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. He'd been through this before. Routine traffic stops that felt anything but routine when you were a black man in America. Each time, he'd done everything right. Hands visible on the wheel, calm and respectful responses, no sudden movements. But each time, there was that nagging fear in the pit of his stomach, the knowledge that even doing everything right wasn't always enough. As he waited for the officer to approach, Marcus's mind raced. What could he have done wrong? He wasn't speeding, his tags were up to date, he'd used his turn signals properly. Then again, he knew from experience and countless news stories that sometimes, simply existing as a black person in a nice car in a predominantly white neighborhood was enough to arouse suspicion. The sound of car doors opening and closing behind him snapped Marcus back to the present. In his side mirror, he could see two officers approaching, a woman taking the lead and a man hanging back slightly. Marcus's hand instinctively moved towards his pocket, where his phone rested. With a subtle movement, he tapped the screen twice, a shortcut he'd set up months ago, after hearing about a new app designed to discreetly record police interactions. As the female officer approached his window, Marcus forced his features into a neutral expression, consciously relaxing his shoulders and keeping his hands in plain sight on the wheel. "Good evening, officer," Marcus said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Is there a problem?" Officer Sarah Miller leaned slightly towards the window, her blue eyes scanning the interior of the car before meeting Marcus's gaze. She was younger than Marcus had expected, probably in her late 20s, with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun beneath her cap. "License and registration, please," she said, her tone professional but with an edge of suspicion that made Marcus's stomach tighten. As Marcus slowly reached for his documents in the glove compartment, making sure to narrate his movements, couldn't help but notice Officer Miller's hand resting near her holster. The gesture, likely unconscious on her part, spoke volumes about the underlying tension of the situation. "Here you go, officer," Marcus said, handing over his license and registration. "May I ask why I've been pulled over?" Officer Miller took the documents, glancing at them before looking back at Marcus. "We've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Your vehicle matches a description we received." "Where are you coming from, sir?" Marcus felt a flicker of indignation at the question, kept his voice level. "I'm on my way home from work. I'm a software engineer at Tech Innovate downtown." Officer Miller's eyebrow raised slightly at this information, a fleeting expression of surprise crossing her face before she schooled her features back into professional neutrality. "And where exactly is home, Mr. Johnson?" "Just 3 blocks from here on Maple Street," Marcus replied, gesturing vaguely in the direction of his house. "My wife and I have lived there for about 5 years now." As Officer Miller jotted down some notes, the second officer, an older man with graying hair at his temples, approached. He leaned in close to Officer Miller, whispering something that Marcus couldn't quite catch. Whatever it was, it seemed to heighten Officer Miller's suspicion. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Miller said, her voice taking on a more authoritative tone, "I'm going to need you to step out of the vehicle." Marcus felt his heart rate spike. This was escalating far beyond a routine traffic stop. "May I ask why, officer?" "I've provided my license and registration, and I've done nothing wrong." Officer Miller's posture stiffened. "Sir, I'm not going to ask again. Please step out of the vehicle." Knowing he had little choice, Marcus slowly unbuckled his seatbelt and opened the door. His movements deliberately measured and calm. As he stood beside his car, he was acutely aware of how the situation might appear to passersby. A black man being confronted by two white officers on a quiet suburban street. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Miller said, her hand still hovering near her holster, "given the nature of the reports we've received, we have reason to believe you may be transporting illegal substances. I'm going to need you to open your trunk." Marcus felt a surge of anger and frustration. This was textbook racial profiling, and they both knew it. But he also knew that expressing that anger could quickly make the situation dangerous for him. Instead, he took a deep breath, centering himself. "Officer Miller," he said, making a point to use her name, which he'd read off her badge. "I want to cooperate, but I also want to understand. What exactly are these reports you've received? Because I can assure you, I'm not involved in any illegal activity. I'm simply trying to get home to my wife after a long day at work." Officer Miller's partner, who had so far remained silent, stepped forward. "Listen, pal," he said, his tone gruff. "You can make this easy or hard. Open the trunk, and if you've got nothing to hide, you'll be on your way in no time." Marcus felt trapped. He knew he had nothing illegal in his trunk, just his gym bag, a few work files, and probably some reusable grocery bags his wife was always reminding him to bring into the store. But he also knew that complying with every demand, no matter how unjustified, was often the safest course of action for someone in his position. As he moved towards the back of the car, Marcus's hand brushed against his phone in his pocket. The recording app was still running, capturing every word of this interaction. It was a small comfort, but in that moment, felt like the only protection he had. "All right," Marcus said, his voice calm but tight with suppressed emotion. "I'll open the trunk, but I want it on record that I'm doing this under protest. I've done nothing wrong, and this feels like a violation of my rights." As Marcus reached for his keys, he caught a flicker of something in Officer Miller's eyes. Was it doubt? Guilt? It was gone too quickly for him to be sure. But as he prepared to open his trunk, revealing its mundane contents to these officers, who seemed determined to find him guilty of something, Marcus couldn't shake the feeling that this encounter was about to take an unexpected turn. With a deep breath, he inserted the key into the trunk lock, acutely aware of the officer's eyes on him, the neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, and the weight of the recording device in his pocket. As he turned the key, Marcus silently prayed that whatever happened next, he would make it home safely to Lisa tonight. The trunk latch released with a soft click, and Marcus slowly raised the lid, unaware that the next few moments would change not just his life, but the lives of everyone involved in ways none of them could have anticipated. The trunk of Marcus's Audi opened with a soft hydraulic hiss, revealing its contents to the scrutinizing gaze of Officer Miller and her partner. Marcus stood to the side, his heart pounding as the officers peered into the space. "Step back, sir," Officer Miller instructed, her hands still hovering near her holster. Marcus complied, taking a few steps away from the vehicle. He watched as Officer Miller began to rifle through his belongings, partner keeping a watchful eye on Marcus. "Gym bag," Officer Miller announced, unzipping the duffel and peering inside. Clothes, shoes, nothing unusual. She moved on, shifting aside some papers and folders. "Work documents?" she questioned, glancing at Marcus. "Yes," Marcus replied, his voice steady despite his internal turmoil. "I'm working on a big project. Sometimes I bring work home." Officer Miller nodded, continuing her search. Her movements were methodical, but Marcus could sense a growing uncertainty in her demeanor. It was clear she wasn't finding what she had expected, or perhaps hoped. Fine. As the search continued, Marcus noticed more neighbors emerging from their homes, watching the scene unfold from their front yards. He felt a mix of embarrassment and anger at being put on display like this, knowing that for some, this incident would only reinforce their pre-existing biases. Suddenly, Officer Miller's hand froze as it reached the back of the trunk. "What's this?" she asked, her voice sharp with renewed suspicion. Marcus's breath caught in his throat. He had no idea what she could be referring to. He knew there was nothing illegal in his car. Officer Miller slowly withdrew her hand, holding a small, worn teddy bear. The stuffed animal had clearly seen better days, with patchy fur and a slightly lopsided smile. "Care to explain this, Mr. Johnson?" Officer Miller asked, her tone a mix of confusion and lingering suspicion. For a moment, Marcus was too stunned to speak. Then, a wave of emotion washed over him as he recognized the toy. That's Hope," he said softly. "Hope?" Officer Miller repeated, clearly not expecting this response. Marcus nodded, swallowing hard. "She belongs to my daughter Zoe. Or, she did." Something in Marcus's voice made Officer Miller pause. Her partner, who had been maintaining a stern demeanor throughout the encounter, furrowed his brow in concern. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Miller said, her voice noticeably softer, "could you please explain?" Marcus took a deep breath, struggling to maintain his composure. "Zoe was our daughter. She passed away 2 years ago. Leukemia. She was only 6. A heavy silence fell over the scene. Even the watching neighbors seemed to hold their breath. "Hope was Zoe's favorite toy," Marcus continued, his voice barely above a whisper. "She took it everywhere, to every doctor's appointment, every hospital stay. After she died, I couldn't bear to take it out of the car. Felt like removing the last piece of her." Officer Miller's hand trembled slightly as she held the small bear. The suspicion in her eyes had been replaced by a mix of shock and dawning horror at what she had done. "Mr. Johnson," she began, her voice unsteady, I'm so sorry. I had no idea." Marcus met her gaze, years of pain and frustration bubbling to the surface. "No, you didn't. You didn't know anything about me, except what you assumed based on the color of my skin and the car I drive." Officer Miller's partner shifted uncomfortably, clearly unsure how to handle this unexpected turn of events. "Now, listen here," he started, but Officer Miller held up a hand to stop him. "No, Thompson," she said firmly. "He's right." She turned back to Marcus, still cradling the teddy bear in her hands. "Mr. Johnson, I owe you an apology. A big one. My assumptions and actions were wrong, inexcusable." Marcus was taken aback by her candor. He had expected defensiveness, perhaps even aggression. This admission caught him off guard. As the tension of the moment began to dissipate, replaced by a heavy, emotional atmosphere, a new voice cut through the air. "Marcus? What's going on here?" All heads turned to see a woman hurrying down the sidewalk towards them. Lisa Johnson, Marcus's wife, took in the scene with a mix of confusion and growing anger. "I saw the commotion from down the street," Lisa said as she reached them, placing a protective hand on Marcus's arm. "Are you okay? What's happening?" Before Marcus could respond, Officer Miller stepped forward, still holding Hope the bear. "Mrs. Johnson, I presume? I'm Officer Sarah Miller. There's been a misunderstanding." Lisa's eyes narrowed as she looked from the officer to the bear and back to her husband. Understanding dawned on her face, quickly followed by a flash of pain and then anger. "A misunderstanding?" she repeated, her voice tight with emotion. "You mean you profiled my husband, forced him to open our car, and then dug through our personal belongings, including our dead daughter's toy? That kind of misunderstanding?" Officer Miller flinched at the harsh but accurate summary. "Ma'am, I know there's nothing I can say to make this right, but—" "You're damn right there isn't." Lisa cut her off. She turned to Marcus, her voice softening. "Are you okay? Do we need to call our lawyer?" Marcus, still processing the roller coaster of emotions from the past few minutes, shook his head slowly. "I'm okay," he said, then added pointedly, "and I have it all on video." Officer Miller's head snapped up at this, her eyes widening in surprise. Her partner, Officer Thompson, stepped forward with a scowl. "Video? What do you mean, video?" Marcus reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. "I've been recording this entire interaction," he said calmly, "from the moment you pulled me over." The atmosphere shifted once again, tension rebuilding as the implications of this revelation sank in. Officer Thompson's face darkened with anger, but Officer Miller held up a hand to stop him from speaking. "You had every right to record, Mr. Johnson," she said, her voice steady despite the clear discomfort in her expression. "Given how this interaction started, I can't blame you for wanting to protect yourself." Lisa, who had been watching this exchange with growing interest, spoke up. So what happens now, Officer Miller? Are you going to try to confiscate my husband's phone? Arrest him on some trumped-up charge? Officer Miller shook her head, looking more defeated than authoritative now. No, Mrs. Johnson. What happens now is that I radio this in to my superior, file a full report on my misconduct, and face whatever consequences come from that. This statement seemed to surprise everyone, including her partner. Officer Thompson sputtered. Bera, you can't be serious. This could end your career. And it should if this is how I'm going to police. Officer Miller replied firmly. She turned back to Marcus and Lisa. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I know my words probably don't mean much right now, but I am truly, deeply sorry. This isn't the kind of officer I wanted to be when I joined the force. I've let my biases and assumptions guide my actions. And in doing so, I've not only failed you, but I've failed my oath to protect and serve. Marcus and Lisa exchanged a look, years of shared experiences and unspoken understanding passing between them. Finally, Marcus spoke. Officer Miller, he began, his voice calm but firm. You're right that words aren't enough. What happened here tonight is a symptom of a much larger problem. But, he paused, considering his next words carefully, your willingness to admit your mistake and face the consequences. That's a start. Lisa nodded in agreement. We've seen too many of these incidents end in tragedy with no accountability. The fact that you're willing to hold yourself accountable is unexpected but appreciated. Officer Miller nodded solemnly, still holding Hope the bear. She looked down at the worn toy, then gently held it out to Marcus. I believe this belongs with you, she said softly. As Marcus took the bear, cradling it with a tenderness that spoke volumes about the love he had for his lost daughter, the sound of another police siren filled the air. A new patrol car pulled up, and an older man with captain's bars on his uniform stepped out. Miller, Thompson, the captain called out as he approached. I got a call about a situation here. What's going on? Officer Miller straightened her posture, squaring her shoulders as she prepared to face the consequences of her actions. Captain Brooks, sir, I've made a serious error in judgment during a traffic stop. I've violated department policy, and more importantly, I've violated the trust and rights of Mr. and Mrs. Johnson here. Captain Brooks's eyebrows shot up in surprise at this forthright admission. He looked from Officer Miller to the Johnsons, taking in the scene before him. I see, he said slowly. And I assume this error in judgment is recorded on the dashcam? Yes, sir, Officer Miller replied, and Mr. Johnson has his own recording of the incident as well. Captain Brooks nodded, his expression grave. All right, Miller, Thompson, I want you both back at the station immediately to give full statements. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, he turned to address Marcus and Lisa directly. I want to assure you that this incident will be thoroughly investigated. We would appreciate your cooperation in providing statements as well. Marcus nodded, still holding Hope close to his chest. We'll cooperate, Captain, but we also want assurances that this won't be swept under the rug. What happened here tonight is not okay, and it's not an isolated incident. I understand, Mr. Johnson, Captain Brooks replied, and you have my word that this will be handled with full transparency. In fact, paused, seeming to come to a decision. I'd like to propose something, if you're willing to hear me out. As the captain began to outline his proposal, a small crowd of neighbors had gathered at a respectful distance, watching the scene unfold. Among them, a young reporter who lived down the street was furiously taking notes on her phone, recognizing the potential impact of what she was witnessing. The night that had started with a routine traffic stop was evolving into something much more significant. Potential turning point, not just for Marcus and Officer Miller, but for the entire community's approach to policing and racial bias. As Marcus listened to Captain Brooks, still acutely aware of the recording app running on his phone in his pocket, he couldn't help but feel that this unexpected encounter might lead to changes he and Lisa had been fighting for years. The weight of Hope, the bear in his arms, reminded him of why this fight was so important. For Zoe, for all the children who deserve to grow up in a world free from the kind of assumptions and biases that had led to tonight's incident. The rising action of this night was far from over, and the climax that was building promised to have repercussions that would extend far beyond this quiet suburban street. Streetlights flickered on as dusk settled over Oakwood Avenue, casting long shadows across the gathering of police officers, the Johnson family, and curious onlookers. Captain Brooks cleared his throat, drawing everyone's attention. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, Officer Miller, I believe we have an opportunity here," he began, his voice carrying the weight of years of experience. "What happened tonight is unacceptable, but it's also a chance for real change. I'd like to propose that we use this incident as a catalyst for a community-wide conversation and reform initiative." Marcus and Lisa exchanged glances, a mix of surprise and cautious hope in their eyes. "What exactly are you suggesting, Captain?" Marcus asked, still cradling Hope the bear. Captain Brooks took a deep breath. "I'm proposing a town hall meeting, open to all residents, where we discuss this incident openly. We'll play the recordings both from the dashcam and Mr. Johnson's phone, and use them as a starting point for a larger discussion about racial profiling, police training, and community relation." Officer Miller, who had been standing silently, her face a mask of shame and regret, spoke up. "Sir, I'm willing to participate fully. I need to take responsibility for my actions." Lisa's eyes narrowed. "And what guarantee do we have that this won't just be a PR stunt, that real changes will be made?" Captain Brooks nodded, acknowledging the validity of her concern. "That's why I want to form a civilian oversight committee. Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I'd like you both to be part of it. We'll also invite other community leaders, activists, and experts in racial justice and police reform." The proposal hung in the air, its potential for significant change palpable. Marcus and Lisa conferred quietly, their whispered discussion intense but brief. "We're interested," Marcus said finally, "but we have conditions." "Name them," Captain Brooks replied without hesitation. "First," Marcus began, "complete transparency. All recordings, reports, and discussions are made public. Second, we want a commitment to implement the changes recommended by the Oversight Committee. And third, we want assurance that there will be no retaliation against Officer Miller for her admission of wrongdoing." This last condition surprised everyone, especially Officer Miller herself. "Mr. Johnson," she started, her voice thick with emotion, "you don't have to." Marcus held up a hand, stopping her. "What you did was wrong, Officer Miller, but your willingness to admit it and face the consequences, that's rare, and it's exactly the kind of accountability we need more of in law enforcement." Captain Brooks nodded solemnly. "Those are fair conditions, Mr. Johnson. You have my word that they will be met." As this exchange took place, the young reporter who had been observing from the sidelines saw her opportunity. She stepped forward, phone in hand. "Excuse me, I'm Aisha Patel from the Oakwood Gazette. Would you be willing to comment on what's happening here?" Captain Brooks looked to Marcus and Lisa, silently deferring to their decision. After a moment's hesitation, Lisa nodded. "Yes, Miss Patel. I think it's important that this story gets out." What followed was a flurry of activity. As Aisha interviewed the key players, neighbors who had been watching from a distance began to approach, drawn by the unusual scene unfolding on their quiet street. "Is it true that Officer Miller is admitting to racial profiling?" one neighbor asked, his voice a mix of shock and curiosity. "Are you really going to show the video to everyone?" Another chimed in, looking both intrigued and uncomfortable. As the questions flew, Marcus found himself at the center of attention, a position he had never sought but now embraced with a sense of purpose. He spoke calmly but firmly about the incident, the larger issues it represented, and the potential for change. Lisa, standing by his side, added her own perspective. "This isn't just about one traffic stop gone wrong," she explained to the growing crowd. "It's about the countless similar incidents that happen every day, many with far worse outcomes. It's about the fear that people of color live with, never knowing if a routine interaction with police might escalate into something dangerous." As the impromptu community meeting continued, Officer Miller stepped forward. Her face was pale, but her voice was steady as she addressed her neighbors. "I became a police officer to protect and serve," she began, her words carrying across the now silent street. "Tonight, I failed in that duty. My actions were guided by biases I didn't even realize I had, and in doing so, I caused harm to a family that has already endured so much pain." She turned to face Marcus and Lisa directly. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson, I know my words can't undo what I've done, but I want you to know that I am committed to doing better, to being better. Your grace in this situation, it's opened my eyes in ways I never expected." The sincerity in her voice was unmistakable, and it seemed to have an effect on the gathered crowd. The atmosphere, which had been tense and charged with potential conflict, began to shift. There was still anger and hurt, but also a growing sense of possibility. Possibility of real dialogue, of understanding, change. As the night wore on, the gathering on Oakwood Avenue evolved into something extraordinary. Neighbors who had lived side by side for years without really knowing each other began to share their own experiences with racial profiling and police interactions. African American residents spoke of the constant vigilance required to navigate a world where their every move could be seen as suspicious. White residents listened, many hearing these perspectives for the first time. Captain Brooks, seeing the organic community dialogue unfolding, made a decision. "Folks," called out, raising his voice to be heard, "I think we've just had our first town hall meeting, but it shouldn't end here. I'm committing right now to making this a regular event. We'll meet monthly, in a proper venue, continue these discussions, and work together on concrete reforms." The announcement was met with a chorus of approval from the gathered residents. Even those who had initially been skeptical seemed energized by the possibility of positive change in their community. As the impromptu meeting began to wind down, Marcus found himself face to face with Officer Miller once again. The tension between them was still palpable, but it was tempered now by a shared understanding of the night's significance. "Mr. Johnson," Officer Miller began, her voice low and earnest, "I know I have no right to ask anything of you, but I was wondering if you might be willing to work with me to help train other officers about the impact of their actions. Your story, your daughter's story, I think it could make a real difference." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, the weight of Hope the bear still in his arms, a constant reminder of what was at stake. Finally, he nodded. "I think Zoe would have wanted that," he said softly. "She always believed in second chances." As Marcus and Officer Miller shook hands, a photographer from the Oakwood Gazette captured the moment. The image, a black man and a white police officer, connected by a small, worn teddy bear, would soon become a powerful symbol of the night's events and the changes it set in motion. Climax of the evening came as the gathering began to disperse. Captain Brooks, Marcus and Lisa Johnson, Officer Miller, and several community leaders who had joined the impromptu meeting gathered in a tight circle. Together, they drafted a preliminary plan for moving forward, a series of town halls, the formation of the Civilian Oversight Committee, and a commitment to review and revise police training and policies. As Marcus signed the hastily drafted document, he felt a surge of emotion. This wasn't the end of the struggle, far from it, but it was a beginning, crack in the foundation of systemic inequality that had seemed so impenetrable for so long. "You know," Lisa said, her voice thick with unshed tears, "when you left for work this morning, I never imagined the day would end like this." Marcus nodded, pulling his wife close. "Me neither. Maybe this is what Zoe meant." At Lisa's questioning look, he continued, "Remember what she used to say? Every end is a new beginning. At the time, I thought she was just repeating something she'd heard in a movie, but now..." Lisa's eyes welled up as she remembered their daughter's words. "Now it feels like she knew something we didn't." As the Johnsons prepared to finally head home, the weight of the evening's events settling on their shoulders, they were stopped by Aisha Patel, the young reporter. "Mr. and Mrs. Johnson," she said, her eyes bright with the excitement of a journalist who knows she's on to an important story. "I want to thank you for your openness tonight. This story, I think it has the potential to spark similar conversations and changes in communities across the country. Would you be willing to do a more in-depth interview for a feature article?" Marcus and Lisa shared a look, years of shared experiences and unspoken communication passing between them in an instant. They both knew that saying yes would mean stepping into the public eye, opening themselves up to scrutiny, and potentially reliving painful memories. They also recognized the potential impact their story could have. "Yes," Marcus said finally, his voice firm with resolve. "We'll do it. For Zoe." For every child who deserves to grow up in a world where they're judged by the content of their character, not the color of their skin. As they finally drove home, the events of the evening replaying in their minds, Marcus and Lisa felt a mix of exhaustion and exhilaration. The routine traffic stop that had started with fear and anger had transformed into something neither of them could have anticipated. Catalyst for change, a moment of community coming together, a tribute to their daughter's memory. The road ahead would not be easy. They knew there would be resistance, setbacks, and moments of frustration. But as they pulled into their driveway, Hope the bear nestled safely between them. They felt something they hadn't experienced in a long time. A sense of true hope, the future. The climax of this unexpected night had passed, but its repercussions were only beginning to unfold. In living rooms, police stations, and community centers across Oakwood and beyond, conversations were starting, minds were opening, and the seeds of real change were being planted. And it all started because a cop ordered a black man to open his trunk, not realizing she was being recorded, and in doing so, opened the door to a future neither of them could have imagined. The weeks and months following that fateful night on Oakwood Avenue saw a flurry of activity and change that rippled far beyond the borders of the small suburban community. The story of Marcus Johnson's encounter with Officer Sarah Miller, as reported by Asha Patel in the Oakwood Gazette, quickly gained traction. National news outlets picked up the story, fascinated by the unexpected turn of events and the community's response. Marcus and Lisa found themselves at the center of a media storm, their faces appearing on morning shows and their stories sparking debates across the country. True to his word, Captain Brooks organized the first official town hall meeting just 2 weeks after the incident. The Oakwood Community Center was packed to capacity, with residents spilling out into the parking lot, straining to hear through open windows. As promised, the dashcam footage and Marcus's phone recording were played for all to see. The room fell silent as they watched the encounter unfold. Tension palpable as Officer Miller's initial suspicion gave way to the emotional revelation about Zoe and Hope the bear. When the recordings ended, there wasn't a dry eye in the house. The rawness of the moment, the pain in Marcus's voice as he spoke about his daughter, the shock and remorse on Officer Miller's face. It humanized an issue that had too often been reduced to statistics and polarized debates. Marcus was the first to speak after the viewing. He stood tall, Hope clutched in one hand, Lisa's hand firmly in the other. "What you just saw," he began, his voice steady and clear, "is not unique. It's happening every day in every city across this country. But what is unique is what happened next. The acknowledgement, the apology, the commitment to change. That's what we're here to build on." Over the next 3 hours, residents shared their own experiences, asked tough questions, and began the difficult work of confronting long-held biases and assumptions. It wasn't always comfortable. Voices were raised, tears were shed, but it was real, raw, and necessary. By the end of the night, the newly formed Civilian Oversight Committee had its first members. Marcus and Lisa were joined by community leaders, civil rights attorneys, and longtime Oakwood residents of various races and backgrounds. Their first task, a comprehensive review of the police department's training and policy. Officer Sarah Miller, true to her word, became an integral part of the reform process. She spoke candidly about her own biases and the flaws in her training, working tirelessly with the Oversight Committee to develop new protocols for traffic stops and community interaction. "I can't change what I did that night," she said in one particularly emotional committee meeting, "but I can make damn sure it doesn't happen again. Not by me, not by anyone on this force." The changes implemented over the next 6 months were sweeping. New training programs were developed, focusing on de-escalation techniques, cultural sensitivity, and recognizing and overcoming implicit bias. The department's use of force policies were overhauled, with an emphasis on peaceful resolution and a clear definition of when force could be used as a last resort. But perhaps the most significant change was the introduction of the Community Partners Program. Under this initiative, officers were required to spend time each month in non-enforcement roles in the community, volunteering at local schools, participating in neighborhood cleanup events, or simply walking a beat, and engaging in positive interactions with residents. The impact of these changes soon became evident. Complaints against officers dropped significantly, and community satisfaction surveys showed a marked improvement in trust and rapport between residents and law enforcement. Marcus and Lisa found themselves at the forefront of this transformation. Their story and their tireless advocacy inspired similar initiatives in neighboring towns and cities. They were invited to speak at police academies, sharing their experience and emphasizing the importance of seeing the humanity in every interaction. 1 year after the incident, Oakwood held a special ceremony to commemorate the progress made and rededicate themselves to the work still to be done. The event was held in the park, not far from where Marcus had been pulled over that fateful night. As Marcus took the podium, he looked out over the gathered crowd. He saw familiar faces. Officer Miller, now a sergeant and head of the department's new Community Relations Division. Captain Brooks, his hair a little grayer but his eyes bright with pride. Aisha Patel, whose ongoing coverage of Oakwood's transformation had earned her a Pulitzer nomination. But he also saw new faces. Families who had moved to Oakwood after hearing about its progressive policies, civil rights leaders from across the state eager to learn from their example, and most touchingly, a group of children from Zoe's old elementary school, each clutching a teddy bear in honor of hope. A year ago, Marcus began, his voice carrying across the hushed crowd, "I stood on this spot feeling afraid, angry, and alone. Today, I stand here feeling hopeful, supported, a part of a community that has chosen to face its challenges head-on." He went on to outline the changes that had been made, the lives that had been touched, and the work that still lay ahead. As he spoke, Lisa joined him on stage, followed by Officer Miller. The three stood together, a living testament to the power of honesty, forgiveness, and shared purpose. "But this isn't just Oakwood's story," Marcus continued. "This is a blueprint that can be followed anywhere, by anyone willing to do the hard work of confronting uncomfortable truths and making real change." As if to underscore his point, representatives from 10 other cities across the state stood up in the audience. Each held up a signed pledge, committing to implementing similar reforms in their own communities. The ceremony concluded with the unveiling of a new monument in the park. It was a simple design, bronze casting of 2 hands clasped together, one dark-skinned, one light. The base was a small teddy bear and an inscription that read, "In memory of Zoe Johnson and all the children who inspire us to build a better world. May we never stop reaching across divides, seeking understanding and working towards justice for all." As the crowd dispersed, Marcus and Lisa found a quiet moment alone. They stood hand in hand before the new monument, each lost in their own thought. "Do you think we've made a difference?" Lisa asked softly, leaning her head on Marcus's shoulder. Marcus was quiet for a moment, his eyes on the bronze hands reaching towards each other. "I think we've started something," he said finally. "It's not perfect, and we have a long way to go, but yes, I think we've made a difference." Lisa nodded, wiping away a tear. "Zoe would be proud," he whispered. "She would," Marcus agreed, "and I think she'd want us to keep going." As they turned to leave, they were approached by a young black boy, no more than 10 years old. He looked up at them with wide, earnest eyes. "Mr. Johnson," he said hesitantly, I want to be a police officer when I grow up, but I want to be a good one like Sergeant Miller. Do you think that's okay?" Marcus knelt down to the boy's level, his heart full. "What's your name, son?" "Darius," the boy replied. "Well, Darius," Marcus said, his voice gentle but firm, "I think that's more than okay. I think that's exactly what we need. Promise me you'll remember this moment and that you'll always strive to be the kind of officer who brings people together, not drives them apart." Darius nodded solemnly, his chest puffing up with the weight of the promise. As he ran back to his parents, Marcus stood, a new light in his eyes. "You know," he said to Lisa, "I think I just got a glimpse of the future we're working towards." As they walked home, the setting sun painting the sky in hues of orange and pink, Marcus and Lisa reflected on the journey of the past year. The pain of losing Zoe would never fully fade, but they had found a way to channel their grief into positive action. They had taken a moment of fear and injustice and transformed it into a movement for change. The road ahead was still long, and there would undoubtedly be challenges and setbacks along the way. But as they reached their front porch, Marcus paused, looking back at the park where the new monument stood. "Every end is a new beginning," he murmured, echoing Zoe's words from so long ago. Lisa squeezed his hand. "And this is just the beginning," he added. As they stepped inside their home, Marcus and Lisa knew that their work was far from over, but they also knew that they had sparked a change that would continue to grow and spread, touching lives far beyond their small community. The story that had begun with a routine traffic stop became something much bigger, testament to the power of transparency, accountability, and the unyielding human spirit. It was a reminder that even in the darkest moments, there is potential for growth, understanding, and lasting change. And as night fell over Oakwood, a new day was already dawning, a day full of promise, possibility, and the ongoing work of building a more just and equitable world. 5 years had passed since that fateful night on Oakwood Avenue. The small suburban street, once the stage for a tense confrontation, now stood as a symbol of transformation and hope. On a warm summer evening, much like the one when it all began, Marcus and Lisa Johnson sat on their front porch, watching the neighborhood children play. Among them was Darius, now a teenager, who waved enthusiastically as he passed by on his bike. "He starts at the police academy next fall," Lisa remarked, a hint of pride in her voice. "Can you believe it?" Marcus nodded, a small smile playing on his lips. "He's going to make a fine officer, the kind we always hoped to see." As they sat in comfortable silence, both reflected on the journey of the past 5 years. The changes that had begun in Oakwood had indeed spread, rippling out across the country like waves in a pond. The Oakwood model, as it had come to be known, had been adopted by police departments in cities and towns across the nation. Community oversight committees, enhanced training programs, and initiatives fostering positive interactions between law enforcement and residents had become the gold standard in progressive policing. Marcus and Lisa had become respected voices in the ongoing national conversation about racial justice and police reform. Their story, pain, forgiveness, and transformation, had touched hearts and opened minds far beyond the borders of their small town. Sarah Miller, now Chief Miller, had become a sought-after speaker at police academies and law enforcement conferences. Candid accounts of her own biases and her journey towards change had inspired a new generation of officers committed to serving their communities with empathy and understanding. But perhaps the most profound changes were the ones less easily quantified. The tension that had once simmered beneath the surface of everyday interactions in Oakwood had given way to a sense of genuine community. Neighbors of different races and backgrounds now gathered for block parties, worked together on community projects, and engaged in open, honest dialogues about their experiences and perspective. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the street, Marcus and Lisa were joined on their porch by an unexpected visitor. Chief Miller, off-duty and dressed casually, approached with a tentative smile. "Good evening," she said, a touch of nervousness in her voice. "I hope I'm not intruding." "Not at all, Sarah," Lisa replied warmly, gesturing to an empty chair. "Join us." As Sarah settled in, Marcus couldn't help but marvel at how far they had all come. The woman who had once approached his car with suspicion and fear now sat with them as a friend and ally. "I wanted to share some news," Sarah began, her eyes bright with excitement. "The Justice Department has officially recognized the Oakwood model as a best practice for community policing. They're recommending its implementation nationwide." Marcus and Lisa exchanged a look of quiet amazement. What had started as a moment of injustice and pain had grown into something that could potentially change the face of law enforcement across the country. "It's all because of you," Sarah continued, her voice thick with emotion. "Your courage, your forgiveness, your willingness to work for change instead of just demanding it. You've changed so many lives, mine included." Marcus shook his head, his own eyes misting over. "It wasn't just us, Sarah. It was you, having the courage to admit your mistakes and commit to doing better. It was Captain Brooks, willing to take a risk on a new approach. It was every member of this community who showed up to those town halls, ready to listen and learn." Lisa nodded in agreement. "And it was Zoe," she added softly, her hand instinctively reaching for Hope the bear, who now sat on a shelf of honor in their living room. Her spirit, her belief in second chances, that's what started it all. As they sat together, watching the last rays of sunlight fade from the sky, each felt the weight of the moment. They had taken a single incident, a moment that could have ended in tragedy or bitter division, and transformed it into a catalyst for lasting change. The road hadn't always been smooth. There had been setbacks, moments of frustration, and times when the task seemed overwhelming. But they had persevered, driven by the belief that a better world was possible. A world where the color of one's skin didn't determine the outcome of an encounter with law enforcement. Where communities and police worked together in mutual respect and understanding. As night fell and streetlights flickered on, Marcus, Lisa, and Sarah rose to go inside. But before they did, Marcus paused, looking out over the peaceful street. "You know," he said thoughtfully, "when I started recording that night, I thought I was protecting myself. I never imagined I was capturing the beginning of a revolution." Sarah smiled, placing a hand on his shoulder. "And I never imagined that asking to search a trunk would lead me to search my own heart and change my entire worldview." Lisa joined them, wrapping an arm around Marcus's waist. "I guess Zoe was right after all," he mused. "Every end, really, is a new beginning." As they stepped inside, leaving the quiet street behind, the spirit of hope and change that had been born on that fateful night continued to pulse through Oakwood and beyond. The story of a black man ordered to open his trunk, police officer confronting her biases, and a community coming together to forge a new path forward would continue to inspire and guide others for years to come. In the end, it wasn't just about a traffic stop or recording, or even about police reform. It was about the boundless potential for change that exists when people choose understanding over fear, dialogue over division, and love over hate. It was a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit to transform pain into purpose, conflict into cooperation, and endings into new beginnings. And as Oakwood settled into another peaceful night, promise of a brighter, more just future seemed to hang in the air. Promise born from an unexpected encounter on a quiet suburban street, forever changing the lives of all involved and inspiring a nation to reimagine what community policing could truly be.